Hello everyone, and welcome to Bock Community Garden's Best Practices for 2024. This video will be a mix of recorded audio, phone video captured from our May 4th in-person session, and recycled bits of our Best Practices presentation from 2020. That means there will be a variety of audio quality, including wind noise from the live videos. Here's an overview of what we'll be covering today. Some of this will be repeat information from other videos, but it's valuable information and worth repeating. Now let's do this. First, let's have a refresher on the rules that get broken most often: tool care, gate etiquette, and forbidden plants. I've already talked in the orientation videos about why it's important to take care of the tools, so now I'll give you a demonstration of what to do after you've gotten most of the dirt off at your plot.
The first part, which is clearing off most of the dirt at the plot, because you do have weed seeds or soil pathogens in your plot. You want to keep them in your plot and not share them with everybody, just like you don't want them sharing theirs with you. So this is looking pretty clean. We can take it over to our sand barrel, which has been nicely topped up. So basically and that'll help remove any of the smaller stuff that you couldn't get with your hand, your glove, your stick of wood, or the wire tool brushes that are out on the tool shed. So that's now nice and clean. And let's see where we're going to put this up here. I'm going to put it here just for demonstration purposes, and I'll go back up here. If it's a longer tool and it's on the other side, we do have the bar. We do actually put the handles behind the bars because that helps keep it secure. If you're putting stuff up behind the bar, if it's a rake, turn it around if you can. That way if it does fall out, it's hitting you with the backside versus with the tines. If it's out here like this and there isn't a pivot point, it's less of a concern. It takes a little bit more effort to hit yourself in the head that way. We are working on getting our security bar up here just to help with that, but we had to replace it when we got our brand new notice board. So that's tool cleaning. Cleaning the tools helps them live longer, as well as helps keep diseases and pests from spreading around the garden, so that's why that's important. Anything that's a clipper, do not use on the sand.
Hello, my name is Dan DeLacy. I'm a member of the Bock Community Garden Board. I'm here to talk about gate etiquette. There are 3 gates in the community: one that faces the street, one that faces the prairie, and one that faces the back. What I want to emphasize is that every time you come in, open the gate. I use this or screwdriver, and I open it and I close it so I don't have to touch the gate. And then I immediately turn around and I shut the gate. The back gate is most important. If you see the gates not fully closed, please close them each and every time. And if you're just going out for a minute to your car, or somebody's behind you and you think they're going to be there in 30 seconds or a minute, you can wait for them, but don't just walk away from the gate, because once the rabbits are in here, they have voracious appetites and they can do some damage. So again, 3 gates, always keep them fully latched, and always on your way out, glance back and make sure that you've closed the gate you came in and out of, and do us a favor and just glance over at the other 2 gates and make sure they're closed. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for keeping the Bock Community Garden rabbit-free.
This is a list of plants that are not allowed in the garden. They fall into 3 main categories: poisonous, invasive, or woody. To simplify, we've listed the woody and invasive plants together, as there is more overlap between those groups. Poisonous plants not allowed at Bock include a lot of pretty flowers, including foxglove, delphinium, morning glories, and daffodils. They may be pretty, but they can also make someone, particularly unsupervised children, quite sick. Invasive plants that are not allowed at Bock include mint, horseradish, and morning glories. That's right, morning glories are doubly forbidden. You new gardeners already know all about my passionate dislike for morning glories. Long story short, their relative bindweed is worse than quackgrass. For some good news, chives, dill, fennel, and oregano are allowed, big if here, guys. They are carefully controlled as they would love to colonize your neighbor's plot if you only let them. Now let's talk about some weeds. Let's start with tips and strategies that apply to most weeds. The best thing you can do is weed early and weed often. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Don't let things get out of control like I started to in the picture. Those plants will only get harder to pull out the bigger they get. And don't let yourself get caught up trying to identify everything that sprouts a leaf in your plot. If you didn't plant it, don't give it the benefit of the doubt. Even if it's a vegetable or herb that's self-seeded, we call those volunteers. If it's not where you want it, pull it out. It took me a couple years to stop letting cherry tomatoes grow out of pity. But since I learned to be ruthless, I've been happier and had fewer weeds. Although, the weeds might have more to do with learning to mulch properly, but I'll talk about that later. Be aware that weed seeds can lie dormant in the soil for years and even decades. When we work the soil, those seeds can be brought up to the surface where they sprout, so keep an eye out for new weeds after turning the soil. To prevent cultivating your weeds as well as your produce, focus your watering efforts directly at the base of your plants. Don't water parts of your plot you haven't planted yet. Speaking of watering, pulling weeds is easiest in damp soil. Dry or muddy soil will tend to hold on to roots. A sunny day after a rain is a great time to go on a weeding spree. There are special weeding tools to help remove plants with established taproots. We have some that we will put out with the communal tools. Compostable plants should be shaken free of soil and left to dry in the sun before composting. If you're weeding when the soil is muddy, this becomes difficult. Keep in mind that not all plants are compostable. Rhizomous plants, or weeds that have gone to seed, should be removed from the garden for disposal. Rhizomous plants like quackgrass and bindweed cannot be composted as the rhizomes will persist in the compost and grow new plants whenever the compost is spread. Always have a plastic bag or other trash receptacle on hand when weeding in order to be able to remove any non-compostable plants you pull out of your plot. Here's an example of two of our most common early season weeds. Dandelions are fairly well known. They're easiest to pull out when they're small, so stay on top of them, or you'll need to use a weeding tool to get them out. The roots can regrow new plants, so you really want to get that out and not just cut the top off. Don't let them go to seed, as each plant can produce up to 20,000 seeds. This is one of our edible weeds, so you can take sweet revenge for it growing in your plot by eating it, if that's your thing. Quackgrass is an example of one of those rhizomous weeds I mentioned earlier. In addition to small fibrous roots, they grow underground stems that spread out to send up more plants. These rhizomes break easily, and the pieces can produce new plants, so it's important to get as much of the rhizomes out as possible. The best approach is to carefully loosen the soil with a spading fork and then hand dig up the rhizomes. Never use a rototiller on quackgrass, as that will multiply it like crazy. Once you've removed all the quackgrass, cover the area with mulch to smother any new growth, and immediately pull up any new plants as they appear. Two more weeds that you're probably seeing a lot of right now are velvet leaf and lamb's quarters. Velvet leaf has velvety leaves, go figure. They're also heart-shaped for the ultimate awe factor in a weed. Aww. Each plant produces thousands of seeds that are viable for decades. Good news is that they're easy to hand pull when small and are compostable. Lamb's quarters have triangular leaves with uneven toothed edges and have purple stripes on the stems. They're also easily pulled by hand and can be composted. Fun fact, they're also another edible weed and are closely related to spinach.
The new heavyweight champion of weeds at Bock is the Canada thistle, also known as creeping thistle, field thistle, or, according to its Wikipedia page, lettuce from hell thistle. What makes this weed so problematic is that while it isn't rhizomous, it can regenerate from root fragments, so it just keeps coming back again and again. Repeatedly pulling or cutting back does gradually weaken the root system, but it also sends up new plants each time. Hand pulling is most effective when the plants are young and very small. For larger plants, one technique we recommend is to use the parsnip predator to cut the taproot just below the surface.
And they hurt, so you want to have...
So I've cut it.
And so you just keep cutting it every time it comes up?
Yep.
Okay, so you're cutting it a couple inches down.
Right. Doesn't go really deep, but
yeah,
that's what I'm suggesting. Now, it's not perfect, but it's not perfect to pull it either. It
Yeah.
just makes more.
Leaves and stems can be composted as long as the plant hasn't gone to seed. Roots should be hauled away or left out to dry on the surface until completely dead. If you haven't heard about jumping worms, you're about to. Also known as Asian jumping worms, they are an invasive pest that is taking over Madison. Here's a screenshot from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources website with some ways to help identify jumping worms compared to a beneficial European nightcrawler.
The jumping worms is also something to be aware of whenever you're bringing soil into the garden. Try to be aware of where that soil's coming from. If it's coming from someone's backyard, or if it's particularly the worst one is if it's coming from another community garden. You're taking all of the stuff that's in that soil, any of the eggs, diseases, large pests, that's all coming with the soil as well as the plant. So anytime someone's transplanting a plant into the garden, I recommend having as little soil come with the plant as possible. Some plants you can't clean off the roots entirely. You can get better success transplanting a bare root plant if you put it in a plastic bag to help keep that humidity up on the roots so they don't dry out too much. So that's one way you can help transplant just roots. Even just the roots are going to have some chance, but like if you can avoid bringing things from other community gardens, that's the one to really avoid. People's backyards can also be something to avoid. I know the Arboretum has jumping worms. So it's getting all over Madison. We're just trying to push that off as long as we can.
Exactly.
The jumping worms kill the native worms. I think they also destroy the plant roots. So there's no upside to jumping worms. They're just an invasive pest species that happens to look like our earthworms if you don't know how to identify different worm species.
It's bad for your garden plants, and plus they're prolific if they get in.
Plus, if I heard right, they came up like with Walmart and places like that. That's where they started coming up from wherever they were getting theirs.
Which
Be
is,
careful about your.
whenever you're bringing soil into the garden, be aware that you are bringing more than just soil in the plant.
Now we can move on to the fun stuff. Most things from here on will be suggestions or options that you can take or leave as you garden. I do have at least one rule coming up though, so see if you can spot it. The best thing you can do for your garden is compost. The true secret of a green thumb is good soil. Here's why. Plants need nutrients to grow, and they get those nutrients from soil. If you remove all your plants, those nutrients are gone. But if you turn those plants into compost, all the nutrients stored in the plant while growing go back into the soil. In addition to recycling the plants you grow, adding additional compost builds your soil so that it doesn't slowly disappear due to erosion. Healthy soil retains more moisture and is also more resistant to erosion. Composting also reduces the amount of green waste going into landfills and saves you the effort of hauling all that plant matter out of the garden. Good things to compost include compostable weeds and dead or dying plants. Some overripe produce can be composted, but be aware that plants like tomatoes and squash have seeds that require high temperatures to kill. Hay mulch can also be composted, so you don't need to haul it away when it starts to break down. You can compost your kitchen scraps in the garden as long as you don't include any meat, dairy, or poultry products, as they can carry disease and will absolutely result in rats or raccoons in the garden. That's a big no thank you. Pet poop and fresh livestock manure are also no's due to disease. Don't compost weeds that have gone to seed or diseased plants. Most plant diseases persist in soil, and you will be propagating the disease to next year and possibly your neighbor's plots. Bag it and dispose of it at home. Your home, not the homes neighboring the garden. That's just rude. Let's go over composting at Bock Garden. We provide leaf compost out behind the back gate. It's paid for using the garden fees and is available for everyone, so go and load up a couple buckets or a wheelbarrow. When you do, it's important that you shovel from the sides and the base of the pile, and keep your receptacle close by so you don't spill or waste any. This stuff isn't cheap, so it's important to follow these steps so that most of it goes into plots and doesn't get trampled into the ground. You want to shovel from all sides of the pile or we'll end up forming a cliff like in the picture. This isn't the end of the world, but it's not ideal. It won't kill you to push the wheelbarrow that extra 4 feet to work from the far side of the pile. Besides the already decomposed stuff we provide, we recommend that everyone composts in their plot as well. The simplest in-plot method is to have a designated spot in your plot where you pile all your compostable material throughout the season. Digging a pit or building a circle of wire fencing can help keep things neat and contained. Composting bins can also be used to help accelerate the decomposition. Sometimes you have a lot of material to deal with, like at the start or end of the growing season, and one small pile might not cut it. Here are a couple options that you can do in those instances. Spading in is when you turn the soil over to bury leaf and small green material a few inches under the soil. This can work well if you have a winter cover crop you're turning under, or a carpet of compostable weeds. Walking backwards allows you to work without walking on the freshly turned soil and immediately compacting it. Holding the blade at a 45-degree angle is recommended for optimal ease of turning the soil. Trench composting is great for the end of the year when you have a lot of material that needs to be dealt with. Dig a long trench, 18 to 24 inches deep, right down to that clay layer. Layer your plant material in the trench with produce with seeds and coarser material on the bottom. Chop up your material into sections 6 inches or less to speed up decomposition. Walking on the mound of material will help compact it down. Adding a bucket or two of leaf compost before burying the trench is a great way to build your soil and get that compost in deeper. You'll usually end up with a mound of dirt at the end, but it'll generally settle down over winter as the buried material naturally decomposes. You can sometimes spot the trench locations in winter from the bare patch where the heat from the decomposition melts the snow.
Good morning, I'm Nancy. I'm going to demonstrate the way of using felt bags to grow your potatoes. It's so fun and so easy. So you start with a felt bag, get a high quality one. The first time you add about 4 inches of soil and or compost, and then you plant your potatoes with the eyes up. You just plant them right in there, and then you finish the whole bag. I have about 3 pounds of Yukon Gold that I'm planting here, and at the very end I'll just cover gently and let it grow for 6 or 8 inches, and then add more soil and compost. Let it grow 6 or 8 or more inches, add more soil and compost, and then you run out of bag, and then you let it just grow. And at the very end, harvesting is so easy, it's like digging out Easter eggs out of your soil, and you get to use the soil in your garden for next year. Try it, it's fun.
Next, I'd like to talk about something that I wish I had been told when I first started gardening. Tilling is optional. No-till or no-dig gardening is a style of gardening that is becoming more popular and that I've become a fan of. But I'm also a self-professed lazy gardener. What works for me won't work for everyone, but I'd like to take a couple minutes to share why no-till gardening might be something that you should look into. I first became aware of no-till gardening while taking a soil science class at the university. Turns out soil has natural structure to it, created by the microbes and other soil organisms doing their thing. Tilling and digging disturbs that natural structure, which takes time for the soil organisms to rebuild. When I started gardening, I had this idea that tilling was necessary for plants to be able to grow well because it loosened up the soil for the roots. But it turns out that's only the case if you have heavily compacted soils. After all, the prairie growing next to your garden is plenty of proof that plants do just fine without tilling. Untilled soil also retains better moisture and is more resistant to erosion. Now, I do still have to do some digging in my garden in order to plant plants or sow seeds, but I keep it to a minimum and save myself a lot of time and energy. I still apply compost, but I just deposit it at the surface unless I'm doing my end-of-year trench composting. The earthworms and their friends do just fine at incorporating the compost into the soil for me. After all, that's what they do.
This is Nancy again. I'm going to demonstrate the easy way of creating a bed and marking it off for square footage so that you just can be very strategic about where you plant and when you plant. And one of my techniques that I really like to do is creating my own seed tape. So I just take a paper towel, I open it up, and then I mark where I want it to go. Then I put a little dot of a combination of equal parts of flour and water as my glue. I put in my seed and then smash it together, and now I have seed tape. Now I don't have to do anything about trying to keep it organized. And then when planting, you simply move over your soil plant the whole thing. Water, and voila! In another week or so, you'll have seeds exactly where you want them. Try it, it's fun.
Row covers are a great way to protect your plants and extend your growing season. The covers retain heat while allowing light, water, and air to pass through them. In a sense, they act like permeable greenhouses with sunlight coming in and turning into heat that is trapped. This allows the soil to warm up faster in spring and protects plants from light frost. By using row covers, you can start planting warmer crops earlier and extend your growing season. Similarly, in the fall you can use row covers to protect from early frosts and give your plants a little extra time to produce. Row covers can also block pests such as bugs, birds, and some small mammals. To use row covers, place the cover after planting or sowing seeds. Make sure the edges are buried or weighed down to prevent pests from being able to crawl under loose edges. Be aware that any pests that emerge from the soil will be trapped in with your plants, so check for damage regularly. While your edges should be secure, you want to leave some slack in the fabric that drapes over your plants so that there is room for them to grow and lift the cover with them. Heavier weight covers may need to be supported, and some sensitive plants will need to have the cover lifted away from their tender leaves. Unfortunately, the wonderful growing conditions created by row covers also benefit weeds, so you'll need to periodically remove or get access under the covers to do some weeding. Once the ambient conditions are right, remove the covers for increasing periods of time over several days to allow the crops to harden. An overcast day is an opportune time for the cover to come off for good. Unused or undamaged used covers should be stored out of direct sunlight as UV rays cause the material to break down. We started with the soil and we've worked our way up to reaching for the sky. That's right, it's vertical gardening time. Vertical gardening refers to any method of maximizing the number of plants per square foot of space by utilizing vertical space. That could be by training plants to grow upward, or by creating additional planting spaces by using hanging planters or tiered growing shelves. By increasing the number of plants you grow, you increase the amount of produce you get. Vertical gardening also has other benefits, such as improving the airflow around plants and making harvesting easier by bringing the produce up within easy reach. It can also improve the quality and appearance of your produce. A good example of this is that cucumbers that hang will be straight, while cucumbers that develop on the ground will be curved. Growing produce away from the ground also protects them from pests and critters and makes it a lot harder to accidentally step on them. On the right, you can see a list of the produce that is commonly grown vertically. I've grown all of these vertically, except for the melons, which I plan to try this year, if my seeds ever arrive. In the picture, you can see an example of using the same structure to grow two different plants vertically. This wasn't something I intended to do, but my beans decided to colonize the top of the cages I was using to support my bell peppers, and since it made it really easy to get to those bean pods, I went with it.
Another technique you can use is to think about plants that love to go vertical. Those would be squashes, pole beans, and cucumbers are our favorite. My friend Jim and I share this back trellis, and we do companion planting, succession planting, where throughout the season we'll plant our cucumbers, our pole beans, and our squash. It's a great way to utilize vertical space, and the plants are happy when they're up off the ground, far less disease and far better watering system.
Applying mulch is a good idea whether you're tilling or not. We generally recommend hay, but other materials can be used as well. Our wood chips for the pathways are technically a mulch, but we do ask that you don't use them in your plots as they take longer to decompose and can be a headache for whoever gets your plot after you. When applying hay as a mulch, put down a layer that is 4 to 6 inches deep. It will compact naturally as seen in the picture, though past me could probably still have used a bit more. You can always add more later if your first layer is not quite enough. Leave space around warm weather sprouts like tomatoes and peppers to allow the soil to warm up as the plant grows. Once the plants are a few inches tall, you can gently push the mulch up against the stems. If you're planting more mature plants, you can skip leaving a starting gap. The big benefit of using mulch is that it keeps the soil from drying out as quickly, maintaining higher moisture levels in the soil, and also allowing more time to pass between waterings. I found that with a good layer of mulch in place, I can let the rain cover all of my watering needs unless there's an unusually long dry spell. Lazy gardening win. Sure, putting mulch down takes effort, but it's a set and leave it thing early in the season when I'm still eager and it means I don't have to fuss with coiling hoses or hauling water buckets. Last year, I even accidentally grew this giant morel mushroom in my strawberry plot. That's right, with proper mulching, you too can accidentally create the perfect growing conditions for edible fungus. On that note, I've heard some people worry that the high moisture level under mulch might lead to mold, but since the garden is outside, mold isn't usually a concern. The only times I've seen mold in the garden, it was on rotting produce or in isolated spots on the pathway wood chips. Besides retaining moisture, mulch also reduces soil temperature by keeping light from reaching it. This means mulching can prolong the growing season for cool weather crops. The other big benefit of mulching is that it suppresses weeds. It does this twofold by reducing the number of weed seeds that germinate and then smothering the growth of those plants that do germinate. Some weeds may still make it through the mulch, but they are much fewer and easy to pull out due to the damp soil and their spindly growth while struggling to grow up through that mulch. Another plus for the lazy gardener. There are a couple less obvious benefits to mulching. By providing a protective layer over the soil, mulching reduces soil erosion. It also prevents soil particles from getting splashed up onto plants when it rains or during watering. This keeps your plants and produce cleaner and reduces their exposure to pathogens carried in the soil. Mulch can also improve the quality of produce like cucumbers, melons, or squash by preventing them from resting directly on the soil. The only downside for mulching that I found while researching it is that it can increase slug activity. It can also provide the perfect environment for our resident voles to hide in.
And lastly, one of the things I love to do, because I have minimal places that I like to put my tomatoes. By the way, tomatoes should be planted minimally 3 different places every year. So one year you place it here, another year over there, and another year over there. I don't have that ability to do that in this garden. So I use straw bales to plant my tomatoes in the same spot every year. What? Planting in straw bales? It's possible. Look on the newsletter for the link about how to get the straw bales heated up and how to plant. It's really super simple and you have great mulch at the end of the year.
The things I've talked about are by no means exhaustive, and I recommend every gardener go out and do their own research to find the style of gardening that works best for them. Talk to your gardening neighbors to find out what they're doing and what has or hasn't worked for them in the past. You might learn something new, or even make a friend. But what if you're never in the garden at the same time as your neighbors, or maybe you don't like talking to strangers? Then it's time to go on a Google adventure. The internet is full of gardening resources, including articles, videos, garden planner programs, and forums. To get started, I recommend checking out one of our local resources, the UW Extension. The UW Extension has an online learning store with hundreds of documents about gardening, including topics specific to our area, such as local pests or the best cultivars for our part of Wisconsin. Don't be scared off by the prices. All of the documents can be downloaded as PDFs for free. The pricing is just for a physical copy. To download a document, simply click on the document you're interested in to open up its description page. Once there, click on the button that says View Publication. And ta-da! A new window should open with the PDF. From there, you can download it, print it, or read it online. Good luck with your gardens, stay safe out there, and don't forget to close the gates.